Welcome back to Blurred Summits. Today we have Wejdaan Faridi. He's the president of the University of Calgary Debate Society. He's here to talk to us about public speaking, how to formulate debates, and all that sort of good stuff. So, Wejdaan, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, can you just run us through really quickly your background in public speaking?
For sure. So, I want to note that I don't have a lot of public speaking experience as far as quantity is concerned. The number of experiences, I suppose, but definitely I do so in the quality, because I more so got into public speaking in my first year of university, and very much so that has been my primary commitment, has been in debate throughout this entire time, throughout first, second, and third year of university, and that's been my main source of skill development as far as public speaking is concerned.
Yeah, nice. So, what do you think was like the biggest thing hurdle you had to come over in debate?
So this is something that I face even now, to be honest, and I guess one of the biggest hurdles is just this fear, I suppose, that looms over you. You just don't want to go up there and say something and be wrong, just make a mistake as well. And even now, I think often when you have expectations on you as an older member of the club, sometimes such fears can still come back and haunt you and make things a bit more difficult.
So how do you kind of get over that?
Two things, actually. The first one is recognizing that, it's okay to make a mistake. You'll find a lot of good speakers around the entire world. Even the best of speakers as well, let's say the top 50 world best debaters in the world as well, you'll note that at times they'll make mistakes as well. And for me, it's been a shift in my mindset, I suppose, and how I frame mistakes, because I don't think it's about making the mistake in itself, because you should expect yourself to make mistakes. But I think it's a matter of trying to then recover from mistakes.
Okay. Nice. And we're close friends. And so I remember first year kind of rolls around and you're like, I joined debate. And I've known you to do a lot of things, but I've never known you to do debate. Like, I can understand you like to come up with arguments. You like to have these thought-provoking discussions, stuff like that. What really got you into debate?
So, I'm going to be honest with you. One of the reasons I showed up was because Saad was the one who also said he's going to show up to that first meeting. So if Saad wasn't there, then I actually probably would not be in debate. But I guess there's a few things that interest me. First, you've already said that I like to think of arguments, man.
Right.
I don't know if you remember, but I was the type of person, I'd sit on the side when in chem class when everyone else was doing work, and I'd sit with a few other people and we'd talk about weird philosophical ideas and, conjure up the weirdest and wackiest arguments sometimes. But it was just so interesting to me, just being able to make arguments and trying to prove a particular point. I guess there's other reasons as well. Primarily for me, it's just I recognized my faults in public speaking, and I guess it was and putting that obviously in alongside the fact that now I can also actively participate in public speaking and get better at public speaking. I guess both of those things work together in getting me there.
What do you think is the biggest thing that you improved on in debate? Like, because of debate, this has improved within you,
It's interesting. I think what I've noticed is that I've become very conscious of the types of words that I may be using in everyday conversation. In every single
Give me an
interaction.
example.
In every single interaction that I might... Okay, that's difficult to come up with an example, but at times it's interesting where I'm just going to straight up... I'll stop in the middle of my sentence.
Right.
And it might even be for a full 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking for a word that has a particular context that is best suited for what I'm trying to say. Yes, synonyms exist, but maybe the context is not as specific as I'm looking for it to be. So that precision, especially in public speaking, is a big thing. But the other thing that debate does for you that most people may not recognize is sometimes you have to argue for things that don't particularly necessarily agree with. There's a lot of interesting topics that we might cover in debate, be it a philosophical question such as this house regrets the narrative that love is unconditional. And we talk about these types of ideas, and maybe you might be someone who says, I do think love should be unconditional. But now all of a sudden you're forced to think of the other side. And I think actively putting yourself in a position where you have to try and defend something you don't particularly believe in actively deconstructs your biases and opens your mind up to other possibilities.
Yeah, I guess you're way more open-minded because by nature of being forced to argue for another side, you have no other choice. You have no other choice except to empathize with the other side.
Exactly. This is what you'll note is that within the debate in itself, if you aren't sitting in a position where you are able to, at least for that time period, believe in what you're trying to push forth,
you're done.
It's hard. It's so difficult to come up with arguments and not give up during the round, because otherwise it's so easy for me if I'm not trying to actively buy into what I'm trying to push out during my speech. Either A, it might be monotone, just very disengaging, but the other thing is that I might just give up after someone gives a really good rebuttal to something I have to say.
Yeah, you're like, you know what, I agree with you, I have nothing else to say.
Exactly.
That's funny. So like, I feel like with debate or public speaking in general, the biggest thing that's stopping people isn't necessarily their abilities, perhaps, but it's just that fear that you spoke about. Just being stage fright. You don't want to stand, even class presentations, you don't want to stand up and talk to your peers or people in front of you. What do you think is something that you would say to somebody who has really severe stage fright? They might have the best arguments, the best speeches, but they're just afraid to stand up on the stage. What do you say to them?
There's a lot of things you can consider, but the first thing I will note is that sometimes it is just a matter of being able to toss yourself into uncomfortable situations and over time getting used to it. Maybe it would require you to progressively become, put yourself in a more uncomfortable position, I guess, as time goes on. Maybe find places where you can have smaller groups to actively debate amongst as well. For example, in debate, of course, you can ask the people who are slotting rooms to be, hey, can you put me amongst my friends? Or can you make sure I'm with my friend? And you get this type of emotional support that can help you make that take that initial step into discomfort. But I think there's a few other things, because I'm going to focus in on public speaking, because there's something my leadership prof told us last semester when I was taking Kines 311, which, as you know, is Foundations of Leadership in our Kines faculty. And she said, it's also about reframing what you think public speaking really is, or what you're doing when you're standing on the stage as well. Because some people narrow in on, look, I'm there to speak. But public speaking is only a medium for what the real purpose is as to why you're standing up there on the stage.
Right.
And that is to communicate and share ideas. So if you can find something you're passionate about, and you focus in not on the fact that you're speaking, but the fact that you're sharing ideas, you'll naturally find that it's a lot easier for you to go up there and do that.
And it gets rid of the stakes too, right?
Of course.
Because now you're not like when you're public speaking, you think, I'm presenting, I'm the one who's being judged, right? It's like you're on America's Got Talent or something. But when it's just a collaborative thing, it's something that you're sharing with the other individual, then it's a lot easier to get rid of those nerves.
Oh, 100%. And I think the biggest thing as well is that you have to try and find something that you're passionate about. You don't ever try to public speak and talk about something you just don't care for. Because it's going to increase the amount of hesitation that you feel, the amount of fear and stage fright that you're going to be going through. Because ultimately, it does become a performance and not about the ideas, because you're not invested and passionate about them. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no,
right?
I agree. That's an interesting perspective to sort of bring yourself down. And that's the way that you overcome that stage fright. What is something that you think a lot of people do in their debate or in debates and public speaking that they should avoid? This is a common misconception or a common mistake that people do.
So there's a bad habit, and I guess this comes everywhere. Filler words are common, even in debaters as well. And maybe they look different amongst debaters. Maybe for debaters, it looks something along the lines of me saying, to the extent of time and time again. Maybe it looks like me saying right time and time again. Is, I think people use right possibly more than although I feel like
yeah.
No, I think even that in itself you see it everywhere here and there, I suppose. But the thing is, there are problems with filler words that people don't recognize. Like when you're using filler words, a few things happen, right? The first thing is there's literally a gap in your sentence. There's a barrier now between the audience for them to try and bridge the first piece of the sentence to the second. It just makes things less coherent. The second thing, obviously, is it requires more brain power. You want to present information in a way that's easy to digest. But when you add filler words, it becomes harder for people to digest what you're saying.
Yeah, they need to piece together all the different parts of the sentence.
They have to filter out all of the likes, the whatever other useless vernacular that you're used to using in these types of places where rather than a pause, you'd rather try and put something in there just to try and fill the gap because you feel this need that there has to be no silence. Although studies will suggest that the best speakers actively use long pauses.
How long?
During their speeches. I don't recall quite exactly because I did make a public speech workshop just sometime, a couple months ago actually. But by long, I'm saying more than a couple of seconds. So more than 2 to 3 seconds. And that's perceptively quite a long time, especially as someone who's speaking. So now you're taking what in reality is 2 to 3 seconds is all, keep in mind, is something to me as an individual who's when speaking can think up to 500 to 1,000 plus words a minute.
Yeah.
Is a very long time.
So the solution to those filler words is to take those pauses.
Normalize the pause.
But how do you kind of practice it? See, even when I'm talking, how do you kind of practice it? Like, I these filler words, they're just a part of our normal vocabulary. How do you switch up the way that you do it?
The first thing is that when it comes to public speaking, if you're trying to get better at public speaking, just generally, you take every single interaction at a micro scale or a macro scale as an opportunity to get better at public speaking. Because I can choose to be succinct with my words when I'm talking to you as a friend. I can choose to be very selective with the types of descriptive words that I use, with the when I have multiple synonyms that I can lean back into. If I'm being very selective, then that's me actively trying to enhance my skills as someone who communicates and public speaks. So that's the first thing that I know. But when it comes to filler words, I guess there's a sequence I suppose you probably want to take up. The first one is recognizing that there is a filler word, because many people just simply don't recognize that it exists. They might use like every couple of sentences, but just because they haven't been cognizant of it ever, no one has ever brought it to their attention. Yeah, there's very little, awareness around it. So the first thing is very reflective. Is me trying to recognize that, okay, I do have a problem with a particular filler word that I use. As a matter of fact, in the status quo, insofar as
I had an English teacher one time, and I went to go ask her a question, and she literally did this while I was asking the question. She was counting on her fingers, and then after I finished asking the question, she was like, "You said like 8 times." And she just called me out.
Yeah, no, it makes things difficult, right? For example, do you think she would have been more focused in on your question or counting the number of likes that you used? It
was a huge problem for her. That was
But it's important for us to notice that something exists, and sometimes people won't tell you because maybe the use of the filler word is not as common as you think it to be, or maybe it's very circumstantial, that maybe that's only in certain situations that you find yourself using this filler word. So it first requires an active reflectiveness and reflexivity as well, where you're looking back as well and trying to find, okay, this problem exists. The second part of it is being aware of this problem on a regular basis and trying to catch yourself as you're saying it. Because once you can proactively try and, even if it's just a split second before you say it, recognize that you're about to say something, then you can move on to the third step, which is now trying to take a quick pause. If you have to exaggerate it just to get used to pauses, you can go ahead and do that. But make sure that you're not going to use the filler word and instead replacing it with a pause.
Yeah, and I suppose that you want to do it in the commonplace conversations when you're talking to your friends, because most of the time, 90% of our conversations, they're with normal people, with your friends, with your family. It's very, how many big public speeches are you giving a year? Not many. So if you only wait for those times to practice that skill, then it's going to be a lot harder for you to get rid of those filler words. But if you do it in your everyday conversation, then when those big presentations come up, it'll already be a habit.
Of course. And I think the easiest way for me to ask you on that note is that, well, is a filler word a choice or a habit?
It's a choice.
Or
it's a habit. No, it is a habit.
It's
sorry,
a habit.
I'm dumb. Yeah. No,
I'm
it's a habit.
bro.
It's a habit.
You're taking this somewhere else.
Yeah.
Because you aren't thinking about it.
You're not thinking. It's subconscious.
Exactly. So at that point, you can't consider it a choice, but the alternative to something that's a choice is something that's habit. It's instinctive. And if it's that deeply ingrained in how you naturally react to circumstances and speak in certain situations, then how are you going to fix that if you're going to address it in the 10% of the time you're public speaking? That is
right.
Actually, normally it's less than, let's be real. Maybe it's like 1 to 5% of the time that you're active in communicating with other people that is in presentations.
Yeah, exactly. And, there's something that I really wanted to ask you about filler words. I lost my train of thought. Okay. If it comes back to me, I'll let you know. But so another thing I was kind of curious about is, what are the steps? Let's say I want to make an amazing public speech. And I'm given an assignment to public. Are there a couple of things that are across the board? It doesn't matter if it's a public speech for your school, for your club, for your work, for an assignment in class, a class presentation. These 3 things are a couple of tips that you might know that across the board are going to help your public speeches be better.
100%. I think there's a few things. 1, make things exciting for yourself. When I'm talking about passion, it comes to this as well. Even if it's not a topic that you're particularly proud of or passionate with, like, in all honesty, there's so many creative choices that you can make during a presentation to add that type of finesse and passion that you're looking for. Maybe make it funny, add a bunch of jokes, do whatever you need to pique your passion, interest, and excitement in the presentation.
Yeah.
Because that's actively reducing your barriers and making it easier for you to approach this with focus on what you're delivering in terms of content, and not the fact that you're using public speech as a medium to do so. Because ultimately, if you have a joke somewhere on your slide, then you can present that joke and let the slides do the work. But the fact that you know it's coming up is giving you excitement,
right? And
you want to set everything up for it, and then after you're laughing along, and it releases the tension as well. And this is just an example, of course. Right. And you can also just ask yourself this very simple question. If you were told to just turn around and talk to the person next to you in the cafeteria that you don't know at all, would you rather talk to them about a math course that you're doing currently? Or would you talk to them maybe about a sport that you enjoy playing, and maybe you might be coaching, or you might be in a league of? What do you think is something you do better at talking about? Obviously, it's the stuff that you care about and have a passion for. But there's also a second thing, and that leads me to the second part of what people should consider when it comes to public speaking. And that is, it's also the fact that they just know their content. And there's certain things that you can do to better really consume your content and know it in the back of your head. One of the biggest things, the key things that sometimes people miss out on, is effective organization and structure.
Okay.
If I can subcategorize everything into its own individual chunks, and each chunk follows very coherently, right, and intuitively from the previous one, where structurally it's the most basic template that makes the most intuitive sense. You will always know what's coming ahead.
And your audience will know it as well. They'll be able to remember it better because it just makes sense. It flows easily. And that 1 hour presentation feels like a 10-minute presentation just because there isn't a bunch of these awkward pauses and awkward spots where it seems like, wait, how did we get to this conclusion? Now I'm lost. Now I don't even know where we are.
No, exactly. And that's something that's also important for people to keep in mind as well. For any presentation, try and make the structure as clear as possible and overview the structure in the beginning. Why? Because not only does it remind you of the layout of everything, but it's very important for the audience in any single presentation for them to know exactly when things are coming and at what point. I was talking to someone just recently as well about platforms as an example, especially when it comes to elections. And ultimately, your platform is one of the biggest tests of structure and organization. Why? Because how many people do you think of all of your eligible voters, let's say in a club, are actually going to read through your entire platform?
Not many.
Exactly. What do you think they will read?
The first page.
But if they're skimming, but a lot of the time,
The table of contents.
Exactly. That's basically it. They'll go over the structure.
Right.
So another thing to keep in mind as well is this is deviating a little bit from public speech and a little bit more onto like presentation structure and things to consider there. But even making sure that the titles are telling people what is coming up next is very important. For example, on platforms as an example, you might say, okay, I want to talk about community, but what about community are you talking about? Right? And then you told me this as well, like just a couple months ago. It's about, well, what you have to tell them exactly what they're looking for. And that is the action item that encapsulates everything. Every single policy is not talking about community. It's talking about promoting community. And that's just simply reframing things slightly here and there as well is incredibly powerful to try and effectively take what you have in your mind and try and communicate and relay this information to your audience.
And I think this, like you said, it goes way beyond public speaking. I remember I was on a committee and we were deciding how to hand out grants. One of the grant applications that we get, I bet you it was an amazing organization with an amazing project to back and everything like that. But we couldn't understand it because their headers were garbage. It was like the part of the grant where it was like what they were asking for, the funding aspect. They didn't say, funding as the title, which would have been perfectly fine. Instead, they wrote how you will support our future. I was like, they're giving these titles that confuse the person, and you want to avoid every opportunity of confusion. Right? You want to avoid those as far as you can, and especially in public speaking when the person can't review what you say.
Well, that's incredibly ambiguous. And also, if you're watching this, no hard feelings, man. We love you.
Yeah. Please apply again next year. Yeah.
No, but I think it also comes down to then about just being precise and succinct. Why extend something that can be said in a matter of a few words into numerous sentences?
Do you think that it's the content that matters more, or the delivery, or the person who's delivering the content that matters more?
I think. Sorry, so you said, is it the way that they deliver it or the content that matters more?
Exactly, right? Like, is it the content itself that when you're thinking about public speaking, and I'm looking at one thing to improve, either I improve the way that I deliver the content or I improve the content itself in terms of being more well-versed in the content, being more researched, going more in depth, et cetera, et cetera?
It's hard to say for every single circumstance because I do think that there are instances in which either or may be applicable, particularly to the individual given, obviously what position they're in. I would say that it also depends on what you're considering within the delivery as well, because if this is a written format, I'd say please do focus on what you've written down on the page. I don't care about how you're writing and how superfluous it is. If the content is not good, if you haven't structured this properly, I'd rather have you give me grade 4 writing that it more accurately and precisely and succinctly gives me your ideas.
Yeah.
More than the way that you've presented them.
One of the interesting things about presentations that I've sort of found in myself personally is that when I'm speaking and I have those filler words that kind of extend my phrasing, or if I have times where I kind of ramble on and phrase things in different ways, is that in my mind, I understand it because I'm the one who phrased together this sentence and this topic. So it doesn't matter how many filler words I put in there. It doesn't matter how many sentences or if I'm not concise at all, because in my mind, I know the root. Now, for the person who's listening to me, it doesn't work like that. They're confused because they don't know the root like I know the root. They didn't come up with the topic like I came up with the topic. And so if you figure out a way to fluidly, concisely demonstrate the topic to the other person, even if it feels like you're not, even if it, it might seem confusing at first, that's a lot better than going on and repeating yourself. Yeah.
No, I actually, I 100% agree. And I think it's often something that even in debate, people often struggle with in the beginning, where you're going to find that it's not easy to communicate your thoughts and ideas if you don't have structure to what you're saying. And I'm saying structure because I think it's just incredibly important. Structure and organization is incredibly important because sometimes people tend to even jump to the middle of what they're trying to say. And they'll jump back to the beginning. But it's like, I need the beginning before you can give me the middle, man.
Yeah.
What if a movie started in the middle and then we jump back to the history of the background of whatever happened to the main character after we know that the guy is just about to fight whatever.
He's about to die, and then you talk about his childhood.
What use is that doing you? Yeah, right. And that's why I think structure and organization is the biggest thing. Because and this is what here's the thing. Sometimes a lot of people will know a lot, but they actually haven't pieced things together in a fluid manner in their head. And I do think that sometimes that lack of clarity within what they're saying outside may actually be a reflection of the lack of clarity that they have on the inside.
Yeah, dude, that's actually a very good point. That's why, like, all of these, I think it was like Albert Einstein or whoever said it, they were saying that a person who really understands a topic well can demonstrate it in the most simple terms, right? And the person who doesn't understand the topic that well, then they can go on for hours and hours explaining the thing because they don't understand those root foundations. You know, I saw this article one time. It was talking about a professor who was so well versed in mathematics that he could take a person from counting numbers to calculus in a 4-page paper. Like, it was 4 pages, and he took a person from the basic, 0, 1, 2, 3 all the way up to calculus because he understood the fundamentals of mathematics so well that he's able to do that.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
You might have to send this over to me later to look at, man.
Yeah, and I was like, that's really impressive because, like, who can do that? That's like ridiculous.
That's insane. That's next level.
It is next
It's
level.
hard to comprehend and conceptualize that something is even possible. Something like that is possible in the first place.
If I'm trying to get better at public speaking, are there a series of drills that I can do? Or, is there like a special kind of drill? In basketball, it's do shooting drill, dribbling drill. Are there speaking drills that I can do? Or is it just a matter of you just gotta speak?
In all honesty, it's just treating every single moment that you have where you're speaking as an opportunity to practice public speech. Yes, it sounds incredibly simple, but in all honesty, that is the most effective way. Because not everyone is going to maybe have the time, the resources, the confidence to jump into something like debate, to jump into something like Model UN, to jump into something like speech and force themselves to go through that entire process. It's literally just, as people say, jump into the fire and then you'll be good to go in after the next couple of tries. And
Who says that?
It works,
Jump into the fire.
Just honestly, just you're good, And I know I'm trying to think about the proper words.
Like jump into the deep end, maybe.
Yeah, basically. Although even then, though, it's like you'll drown, but it's like
right.
No, and I think yeah, that's probably the right one. Jump into the deep end. No, there's just something else. Another thing that I was thinking of. I can't recall currently, but I'm not going to try to because it might take too long. Yeah, no, because there's, and I'll give you an example as well. Because sometimes it is a matter of trying to get over your fear by literally pushing yourself to the edge and trusting yourself and just taking a jump. And the best example I can give is a close friend of mine from the debate club. When this person started, they barely got through a few sentences and they were on the verge of tears.
Oh my God.
That's where they started. They literally told me after that they literally could not get through a single presentation in high school. And that's why they said they decided, you know what? Yeah, okay, we're gonna just play with fire right off the get-go. And we're just gonna go all the way. Get up there and start debating.
Yeah.
No reservations.
Okay.
And you know what? Just a year later, they're doing incredibly well. They can manage full 7-minute speeches. And they do it in front of, obviously, other audiences as well, be it members from the club, members from other clubs, because sometimes we do practice with other institutions, be it from the University of Alberta or University of Saskatchewan. And I think that transition is incredible. And especially for that to happen in just a span of a year. To me, that's insane.
Yeah, it sounds like with public speaking, there are a certain set of skills that it doesn't matter how much you learn about it on paper. If you don't do it, it just won't happen.
100%.
Like with leadership, confidence, like some of these skills, I could read 100 books about confidence, but I'm not going to become confident until I start to practice it. I could read 1 million books about leadership, but that's not going to do anything for me if I don't implement it. And the same thing, correct me if I'm wrong, goes for public speaking, where you can read all the books that you want, listen to all the podcasts that you want about public speaking, but until you really take that step and enter into that discomfort, you're not going to get anywhere.
No, not at all. Because at the end of the day, a lot of what you are able to do as a public speaker is very much so a matter of the thought processes you've developed over time. Because even when it comes to reframing how you look at these things, it's not easy to reframe your entire mindset and outlook on something in a matter of days, in a matter of minutes, and even sometimes a matter of weeks. You have to actively try and practice these things until they become habitual. And whether that's with the use of filler words, whether that's with the use of trying to focus in on the idea that you're presenting, rather than the manner in which it's being presented, whether it's the idea of what procedures you've created for yourself on how to recover from, the fact that you are going to be making mistakes. And when the mistake happens, what are the set of sequences that you follow to try and get back on track?
With debate, you learn a series of life skills, right? That
100%.
apply to a variety of different fields. The real obvious one is communication, right?
Yeah.
Communication, that's something you can use it in pretty much every other aspect of your life. Is there another life skill that you can think of that you get from debate and from public speaking that can translate well into other aspects of your life?
Oh, there's a lot, I'm not going to lie. And it's hard for me to sit here in front of you and be able to tell you everything and travel. So I'm going to try and just narrow down to a few that I think are pretty important.
Yeah.
The first one that I've already talked about is obviously trying to deconstruct biases. Incredibly important. Why? Because, you guys talked about cognitive biases and other forms of biases that exist. And just the other day, we were talking about how, the author of Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman, the first person to ever construct a list of cognitive biases, was able to come up with how many?
Yeah,
over 150. People have to recognize that they're incredibly susceptible to being caught in their own cognitive dissonance, their own confirmational biases, and anything that fits obviously within this array of biases that exist. But how do you get rid of it? One of the ways that I've gotten rid of all of my biases is literally put myself in a position where I have to debate things that I might not particularly agree with. Because it shows you that there is another story, that there is another perspective that exists. That yes, everything is a coin, and there are a side to both of it.
Do you think that makes you more patient?
100%.
Like in your day-to-day life, right? Because when you do become more empathetic and you do kind of force yourself to think from another person's perspective, then you can't help but be more patient with them because you understand where they're coming from, right?
The other thing as well is that it forces you not to make as many assumptions,
Mm.
right? Because when do people assume is when they're very sure in what they're particularly believe, what they've been able to conclude off of what they have in front of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example in just a moment here, but it's simply to say that even debate in itself, you'll find so many times where someone will come up there and will give a reply, give a rebuttal, and say something against your argument that will entirely eliminate it and take it, render it useless in the entire round. That's a humbling experience.
Yeah.
To first be able to think that, okay, you know what, I definitely know what's going on around me, in the world around me. I know for a fact that in conflicts as well, that I know what's happening. Why? Because I think myself to have a high IQ. I think myself to just be able to construct good arguments or just have a good conception of things.
Yeah.
And this is the example that I gave you. Interpersonal conflicts is a huge, I guess, application, in my opinion, as far as this particular life skill is concerned. Where, let's say my brother has a history in which he tends to just eat the last piece of whatever I have, be it cinnamon buns that we got, maybe it's pizza, maybe whatever it might be. And, well, this time around, you brought let's say some cupcakes, okay? And you've sectioned it off and made sure, look, brother, this is your half and this is my half. Don't you dare touch my half.
Yeah.
Because you always take my piece at the end. You never care for anything I have to say. And let's say later on down the road, you have two left. Or just not, sorry, you have one left. That one was yours. However, you wake up the next day and it's gone. Now, I might just instantly assume, oh yeah, this person knew how much I hated this. And this person,
a personal
100%, it's a personal attack.
Yeah.
I might instantly assume that. Why? Because I'm not thinking about what I might not be thinking about how I might be wrong here. But I will be thinking about in all the ways in which I can be right. When in reality, your brother was just on his phone and he didn't realize and he just accidentally took it. But he does deeply care about you and love you. But it's just a matter of his lack of awareness that led to that particular event.
Mm.
Yet now your reaction from the assumption is just going to cause even more conflicts between you two. And it's going to exacerbate the situation and raise the tensions, right? In debate, I am forced to consider all the ways in which I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm. Because you need to cover your bases.
Exactly. If I come up with an argument and I don't consider the means by which it can be wrong, well, I'm done for.
Yeah.
My opposition is going to come up here. They're going to give me a few sentences and entirely deconstruct everything I have to say. Before every single round, my best debates are those in which I sit down and I simply follow an argument back and forth in my head. This is what I would say. This is what opposition can say. This is how I can respond to that. This is how they'd respond to that. And then this is ultimately when it comes to that. And then it comes back to me.
Yeah, that was actually something that I really appreciated about your presidency platform for the Debate Society is that you actually said, here are my weaknesses. Here are
100%.
things that I recognize are my faults. Here are the arguments against me, and I will address them, right? And so being aware about your own faults and deficiencies is a very commendable thing.
I would say, just a public note, that it didn't make the final platform because I had to shorten it down.
Oh, did it not?
It was too long. It was too long, man. I had to shorten it down.
that was my favorite part.
No, but obviously when people did ask about these things, I was very open and transparent. And at no point did I tell people either that I think I'm better than anyone else, because in all honesty, I don't think that's how you should be approaching life. It's everyone has their weaknesses, everyone has their strengths, and I personally would rather live in the sight of my weaknesses and trying to improve them first and foremost before trying to promote my strengths and trying to make them the primary face of, not for other people to see, but especially for me to see.
Yeah. What is something that you want to improve in the next year? Personal level.
So what do I want to improve in this upcoming
Within
year?
yourself.
Honestly, the biggest thing is that I want to be able to accept the possibility of failure. I think, and there's this active fear that I've definitely had in me, and it's come out in many different places, right? It comes out in the way that I plan things. And I basically try and ensure that I plan things to almost perfection, and I try and map everything out from step one literally to the very last step, no matter how big the project or the presentation is, before I even take an initial step. Why? Because I there's this need to have everything play out perfectly, right? It also comes out in my inability to sometimes engage in class. Why? Because I have this fear of being wrong. There's this fear of failure just prevents me from doing things. Yeah, normally I would not have been the type of person to even run in a contested election.
Yeah.
That took so much courage from me.
Because a lot of it's out of your hands.
100%. And, for a large part of my life, I think I've definitely been living in my comfort. And a lot of people see me to be doing fairly well. But I personally think that in many places, I have definitely lived within the bounds of my comfort.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, hey, because it's like, maybe from the outside eye, it's like, okay, Wejdaan's always successful. But from your eye, you're saying, I'm always successful because I eliminated the possibility of failure. If there was a possibility of failure, I didn't partake in it.
Like, for example, if I took an English class right now, like, you'd see how fast my GPA would plummet.
Yeah.
And being open to the fact that you are very, very flawed, I guess, and the fact that failure is a possibility is the means by which you're able to try new things as well. And one of the things that I really want to be able to do, in all honesty, is use my profs as more of a resource, because I've always feared some degree of judgment. And again, it comes back to like looking like you're wrong.
Yeah.
Or saying something wrong, or looking like your image is being compromised as someone who has everything together. And I want to like lean into those resources as well and openly try new things. And even, be it through participating in class more, be it through just asking my professors more questions.
Yeah, I empathize with that a lot. Because I'm very similar in that I don't allow myself the possibility of failure enough.
Yeah.
Right? And the unfortunate thing about not allowing yourself the possibility of failure enough is that you don't allow yourself the possibility of success enough either.
Sometimes that's exactly it.
Because you do have to jump into that deep end sometimes, where the possibility of drowning does exist. But turns out that's where all the gold is.
Oh, 100%. And I have a question for you over here, I guess. Are you also like the type of person where if you knew that there was an 80% chance you'd succeed in one place, in one, I guess, choice, and the other choice had maybe 20%, definitely higher reward, quite significantly, but there's a high also chance of failure, are you likely to choose option A with the 80% chance of success?
Yeah, I do the 80% chance of success and keep repeating that until the reward accumulates to the 20%. Even if it takes me 10 times as long.
No, I definitely think that I'd probably be in the exact same shoes, and I'm trying to be more comfortable with taking 20% chance. If I'm in a position in class where I think there's only 1 out of 10 chance that this might be right.
And you know what? Sometimes it's like a complete misconception. It's one of those cognitive biases where we believe it's a 20% chance of success. Turns out the chance of success was actually way higher than we thought. Maybe it's a 50 or 60% chance, and we thought it was 20% chance just because we didn't even lean into it. We didn't even try.
No, that's definitely very true. And I think, what I learned throughout the election as well is that there's definitely things that I didn't do well, in all honesty. Choosing to run in the first place. And how that obviously then led into all of the different advancements and progressions throughout the election. There's obviously multiple steps along the way, be it creating your platform, giving a speech, and then talking at the AGM and trying to answer questions. I messed up at points, and I think the fact that I did mess up was the portions at which I learned the most.
Yeah.
Throughout the entire journey.
Yeah, there is something to that. There is something to that where a big issue that I've had in the past as well, it's that mistakes that we've made in the past and failures that we've made in the past, we allow these things to become attached to our identity. I think that's one of the reasons why we hated failure so much, because we believe that if I failed, then I'm a failure. And this identity remains with me throughout the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And the big realization that I've sort of had over the past couple of months, it's that my past mistakes and failures aren't actually me at all.
Mm-hmm.
And that part of myself is actually dead. I've left that there's an old Abdul buried somewhere.
Yeah.
Metaphorically, right? And with him is those mistakes and those failures. And those actually have nothing to do with who I am right now.
Mm-hmm. I think there's another way to look at it as well. I think it's recognizing that maybe success and failure is simply a matter of state, not identity.
Exactly.
And the fact that your identity is more so crafted by how you react to these things, not necessarily by how, not necessarily by the fact that you are particularly successful or I guess not as successful in a given moment.
Yeah.
Because I think that is simply a state. If I don't have X, Y, and Z habits, I don't think that is necessarily to do with my identity. I do think that is, however, my current state. And for me, that dissociation is what helped me, I guess, move forward.
And that state's always changing. That state, you
Exactly.
know,
Exactly.
like the mistakes that you've made in your election or however, you know, things that you regret, those were past states.
Exactly.
And that's where they should be left. Right? Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to throw a scenario at you. We always ask this to our guests at the end of the interviews.
Okay.
So, you know, you're going on a hike. Imagine it's a normal hike and you want to climb to the top of this mountain.
Yeah.
Right? Now, if I bring hiking shoes with me, hike's going to get easier. If I bring a couple snacks, hike's going to get easier. If I bring a water bottle, hike's going to get easier.
Yep.
So there are some resources, things that we can bring with us that make our hike easier to reach the top of that summit. Right? Now, imagine that this summit is your life. Right? And this hike, it's your life journey. And the summit and the top of that mountain is the peak of your achievements in your life. It's the peak. It's when you're feeling amazing and you've accomplished what you want to accomplish and you feel like you've lived a fulfilled life. That's the peak of your mountain, your metaphorical mountain. What are some things, some characteristics that you believe people should have to bring with them on this hike that's going to help them get to the top of their own summits, their own peaks in their own lives?
Okay, I'm going to try and make this relevant to some of the things I've talked about thus far. Just because I do think that there's a lot of things that I personally hold very valuable in some of the things that I've mentioned earlier. And the first thing for me is definitely a strong sense of reflection and reflexivity. And I did talk about this, obviously, when we're talking about like filler words as an example. But I think it extends far beyond that. It's a level of self-awareness that comes from being able to sit down and just think about what you've done and think about what you're doing as well. It's recognizing that you are ultimately you have to rely on yourself first. You can't rely on other people, especially when it comes to your own self-growth. That's what I've learned. And I'll give you a reason for that as well. No one is going to be as radically honest with yourself as you can be, especially when it comes to feedback. I'm going to be completely like straight up and honest with you on this as well. I've asked so many people for feedback throughout, let's say, the last year. And how many times do you think I've gotten the feedback that I was looking for?
Not many.
Not many at all. People have a natural just inhibition to give people just like good feedback. The type of feedback that is best, that is actually targeting all the things they can improve on before anything else.
And a large part of that is because they don't have the full picture, right?
Yeah, very much so, actually. Yeah, very much so. And I think there's something that you get from introspection and reflexivity, that just simply reflecting on everything that's happening that you do not get from anywhere else. And that is literally being able to analyze and dissect your thoughts. What did I do? But not necessarily what did I do, because everyone can see what. No one will have as clear of a picture as to why. Why did I do that? And you know what? You sit down with yourself long enough, you will come to a conclusion. You will be able to uncover and unveil what were the thought processes behind a specific action that led to that particular event. And I think that's what's most powerful about someone who's able to sit down and be incredibly introspective and reflect on who they are, what they've done, and why they do what they do.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing for me, which is very, very big, and this, I guess I'm going to tie it back to debate. Always assume that you're wrong. In debate, I talked about, obviously, when I'm prepping, I'm going to look for the ways in which other people can take down my argument. And those are going to be the debates in which I obviously perform the best. But why should you always assume that you're wrong? And I'm now going to, I guess, take this from the debate context and try and obviously expand the horizons of such a piece of, I guess, characteristic or advice as well. In any single circumstance, who do you have the most control over? Or what do you have the most control over?
Your own self.
Your own self. I literally, if I fight with you, I kid you not, I have very little control over what you do and why you do it. I have very little control over the circumstances in which I currently exist in. But when I say always assume you're wrong, it comes back to this idea that even in, like, for example, conflicts, it's me just recognizing that, look, there maybe there is something that I could be doing wrong. Maybe there is something that I can improve on. And it's being able to take everything and make it about what you can improve on first before anything else. Because here's the thing, in every single, like, interaction that you have, the one thing you can change as directly is yourself.
Right.
And let's say that you do something wrong as well, right? Let's say that who knows, whatever it might be. Okay.
I can never do anything wrong. No.
I would never expect you to do anything like egregiously. I never expect you to do anything egregiously, like, terrible. You know what I mean? Nothing that bad. But let's just say like you're tailgating me for fun, and then you accidentally hit my bumper from the back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Happened many times.
To be honest, if I was in the big car, your car would be damaged, not mine. No, because that Sequoia, bro, it's like a freaking tank.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because again, what could happen there? Well, the first thing that could happen is I flip out on you, and you apologize and whatnot, and you're trying to make up for it, and things just go way out.
Right.
Right. The other thing that could happen is that I come out, and you're trying to defend your mistake so that you don't have to take any blame. All right. And I flip out on you. Now, most people in that second situation, especially, what do you think they would do? Where are they tossing the blame?
They're tossing the blame on the other person.
On the other person.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's why the person I flip out, and I tell you to bugger off, and I never see you ever again.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think things would have changed if I recognized that the reason that you were being super defensive is because you're in a state of panic? Because you've just made this terrible mistake, and you have not come to terms with this yet. Do you think it would have helped for me to recognize that and change my approach?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So even in that conflict, if I just assume that I'm wrong, that helps me there.
And I bet you if you assume you're wrong, it'll help the person come to their own senses, and they will admit to it. Assuming that person isn't some cruel psychopath. But yeah.
And it also goes back to this idea, but when you assume you're wrong as well, you're going to be always open to listen to other people. That's the biggest thing.
Awesome.
You're always going to be open to, like, listening to other people's perspectives. And you know what? As you and I, as Chris Voss fans,
yeah,
what is the root of what every person is looking for, bro?
That's right. Or connection or something. We have the book right there.
It's about being understood, right?
It's about being understood.
Being listened to. And even in his interviews, he talks about, it's not about being right. It's about being listened to.
Yeah.
If you understand the other person, that's literally the start of, like, being able to mend relationships and gaps in there as well. But even deviating from this, obviously, there's a lot of intuitive benefits if you assume you're wrong, and every other thing as well. Be it, again, your job, your company fails. Well, I hope you're going to be looking at why you could be wrong and what you've done.
Yeah.
Because that is the only thing you have control over, rather than blaming your environment as well.
And that's where the potential for change exists, is if you assume that you're wrong. Because if you assume that you're right, then you don't have any reason to change because you're right.
Exactly. The last one, I think, is some degree of faith or hope. It's actually believing that there is a fruitful and bright future in front of you, and believing that you have the capacity to change and the capacity to actualize whatever goal you've set for yourself. Because if you don't believe in any of that, I'm sorry, there's really nowhere you're going to be able to get to.
It's a kind of a sad reality if you have no hope, right? If you just believe like everything is gonna come to an end and there's no point to anything and it's extremely nihilistic. That's a sad life to live.
No, definitely.
Why wouldn't you want to live in a life that's hopeful?
No, I agree. And it's also just hope for just some degree of hope for a change within yourself that is actually possible, right? And it also goes back to, when we were talking about identity, you're likely going to associate your state with your identity directly if there is no hope in your mind for change, and you're not grabbing really hard on this hope. And this is not the first thing you think of in that circumstance, is that this is a state, because how I react to this and where I end up is what matters.
Yeah, and that's just going to cause a feedback loop, right? And it's just going to cause a feedback loop, and you're going to start spiraling down in a never-ending spiral, the death spiral.
Okay. Does it really lead to death, though?
No, yeah, I agree 100%. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think those three would probably be the things that I'd personally think to be the biggest.
Yeah, assume you're wrong, have hope, and what was your third
Introspection.
one? Introspection. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
self-reflective. The real nice thing that I like about introspection is I don't know who said this, but I heard somebody say the real reason that you want to be self-reflective is that you can now leverage those past experiences for the future. So every year that you age, you don't just restart at a new age. You get to start with those experiences. So if I'm 30 years old, I have 30 years of experiences that I can draw on, 30 years of wisdom that I can draw on. The thing is, if I don't self-reflect, if I'm not introspective, then that 31st year, I won't have those 30 years to look back on. I'm going to be starting.
You're right.
I'm going to be starting from scratch. So the only way to leverage all those years and those experiences that you've had is through self-reflection.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes people talk about experience as well, right? Oh, look, I've been in X, Y, and Z leadership commitments and leadership roles.
Yeah.
Man, I don't care. That doesn't matter. It literally has zero impact because one person who is highly introspective, right? Again, I'm going to mix this with the second point as well, and is always assuming themselves to doing something wrong. In 1 year of a leadership role can likely accrue, I want to say, let's say 2-3-fold more benefit than the person who's been doing it for 5 to 6, 7 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think these qualities are incredibly powerful in
Absolutely.
how you grow and interact with your circumstance, situation, and then, as you mentioned, experience.
Thank you, Wejdaan, for coming on to the podcast again. If you guys enjoyed the podcast today, be sure to think of one friend who might benefit from the information and share this episode with them. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. You can catch the full video podcast on YouTube. The full audio podcast is out on all platforms. Be sure to follow us on Instagram for more content. Thank you.